Let me tell you what 3 days of silence feels like, when the person who has gone quiet is the person who knows you best. It feels like standing in a room where all the furniture has been removed, like reaching for something that has always been there and finding only air, like the specific, disorienting vertigo of a world that has been rearranged without your consent in the few seconds between one version of your life and the next. It feels like the longest wait of your existence. My best friend saw my secret on a Thursday afternoon. He picked up my sketchbook, absently, without thinking, the way you pick up a book from a friend's table without asking because you've been friends long enough that the asking is unnecessary, and he opened it, and he saw the pages I had kept hidden at the back for 2 years. The pages that were the most honest thing about me. The pages that contained, in lines and colors and the careful attention of someone who draws what they truly feel rather than what they wish they felt, the full and unedited truth of who I was. He saw them. He set the sketchbook down. He left, and for 3 days he said nothing. This is the story of what was in those pages, of the 3 days of silence that followed, and of the Thursday evening when he came back, when he stood at my door with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set with the effort of someone about to say the truest thing they have ever said, and said it. My name is Asher Cole. I am 24 years old, and what happened in those 3 days changed the direction of everything. You need to understand what the sketchbook was before you can understand what it meant for it to be seen. I had been drawing since I was a child. It was the first language I found that felt native, the one that came before the careful management of words and expressions, and the presentation of a self that fit inside available spaces. When I was 8, I drew the neighborhood from my bedroom window with a concentration that made my mother check whether I had a fever. When I was 12, I filled notebooks with the things I observed, people on the bus, the way light changed on a wall through the day, the specific geometry of my father's hands when he was thinking. Drawing was not a hobby. It was the way I understood the world, the way I processed experience, the closest thing I had to an honest language. The sketchbook I kept in my desk drawer, the one I had never shown anyone, not my parents, not my teachers, not the college professors who had admired my other work, was different from the others. It had been started 2 years before the afternoon in question, on a night when I had been lying in my apartment at 22, trying to understand something about myself that I had been resisting understanding, and I had picked up a pencil and let it move without the usual editorial supervision, and what appeared on the paper had been clarifying, undeniable, the visual equivalent of a truth said out loud. The sketchbook contained portraits of men, studies of the male form rendered with the care and attention, and this was the part that was impossible to misread, the love of someone who is drawing not an exercise but a feeling. There was nothing explicit in those pages. Every image was fully clothed, fully decent, the kind of art that would pass any review. But the quality of the attention in each line was unmistakable to any eye that knew how to look. This was not clinical observation. This was longing made visible. This was 2 years of the truth I had been living with, transferred to paper because there was nowhere else for it to go. Interspersed throughout were other drawings, more abstract, more emotional. Pages that tried to render in visual terms the specific experience of carrying something in secret. Figures half in and half out of light, doors drawn from the inside, handles visible, shadows that had weight, that leaned on things. Pages that were, in retrospect, an extremely legible diary of a person moving slowly and painfully toward an acknowledgement they weren't yet able to make in any other medium. And then, at the back of the book, the last 20 pages or so, the ones that were most recent, portraits of one person specifically. His name was Will Navarro. He was my best friend. He had been my best friend for 3 years, since the first week of our undergraduate program when we had been placed in the same studio critique group, and had argued about color theory for 40 minutes with a mutual ferocity that had resolved itself, somehow, into an immediate and genuine friendship. He was the person I talked to every day. The person who had seen my other sketchbooks, the public ones, the ones I was proud of, and who had always looked at my work with the particular attentiveness of someone who understood it, not just admired it. He had never seen the private one. Until Thursday. I want to tell you about Will properly, because he is the center of this story and he deserves more than an outline. He was 25, a year older than me, which had never meant anything except that he occasionally used it to claim authority in arguments, with the deliberate comedy of someone who doesn't take himself seriously. He was studying graphic design, the commercial counterpart to my fine arts track, and we had the specific creative friendship of two people who work in adjacent fields and argue productively about the differences. He believed design should solve problems. I believed art should ask questions. We had been having that argument in various forms for 3 years, and neither of us had won, which was the point. He was the kind of person who filled a room not with volume but with presence, something in the quality of his attention, the way he looked at things, the way he listened with his whole body when something interested him. He was funny in the quick, sideways way I liked, best humor that arrived unexpectedly and landed precisely, and was gone before you could fully appreciate it, so that you were usually still laughing slightly after he'd moved on. He was generous with his time and his opinions, and his help, and occasionally insufferably stubborn about things he cared about, which I found irritating in the abstract and entirely endearing in practice. He was also, and I am noting this simply as a fact, not as the beginning of anything, one of the most naturally beautiful people I had encountered. Not in the self-conscious way of someone who knows this about themselves and has arranged their life around it. In the way of someone who is completely unaware of it, which produced a quality of ease that was, in my experience, considerably more difficult to be around than deliberate attractiveness, because there was nothing to brace against. He had been in one serious relationship in the 3 years I'd known him, a woman named Claire who had lasted 8 months, ending with the mutual recognition that they wanted different things. He had processed this with his characteristic combination of honesty and humor, saying at one point, approximately 3 weeks after the breakup, "I think I'm better at being someone's best friend than someone's boyfriend, which is useful information to have before you're 30. I had laughed. I had also stored that sentence in a place I was not going to examine. We saw each other multiple times a week, studio time, coffee, the long walks through the city that had become a fixture of our friendship, because we both thought better when moving. We texted daily. We had the shorthand of two people who have argued and laughed and worked and processed difficult things together for long enough that a full sentence is often unnecessary. He was the most important person in my daily life. He was the subject of the last 20 pages of my sketchbook. He was never supposed to see them. It was an ordinary Thursday in late October. We were in my apartment, my small studio on the 4th floor of a building near the arts campus, the place I had lived for 2 years and which bore, in every corner, the evidence of how I spent my time. Canvases stacked against the wall, jars of brushes and pencils on every surface, the organized chaos of a working artist's space. Will had been here hundreds of times. He knew where the coffee was and where the good mugs were, and which chair was comfortable and which looked comfortable but wasn't. He moved through my apartment with the ease of someone who has made themselves at home over the course of a long friendship. We had spent the afternoon working on separate projects in companionable proximity, a thing we did regularly, the particular pleasure of working alongside someone whose company you don't need to perform for. He was on his laptop with a design brief. I was at my drawing table with a canvas assignment for my advanced studio class. Around 4 o'clock, I went to make coffee. The sketchbook was on my desk. I had taken it out that morning to add to it, a thing I did occasionally when something needed to go somewhere, and in my distraction with the canvas assignment, I had not put it back in the drawer. It was sitting on the corner of the desk, closed, looking like every other sketchbook in my apartment. I was in the kitchen for 3 minutes. When I came back, Will was standing at my desk with the sketchbook open in his hands. I know the exact page he was on because I have replayed this moment so many times that it has become almost filmic in my memory. The specific quality of the afternoon light, the sound of traffic 4 floors below, the weight of the 2 mugs of coffee in my hands, the way everything went very still. He was looking at one of the later pages. One of the portraits of him, the most recent one, the one I had drawn 3 weeks before from memory after an afternoon we'd spent in the campus gallery. It was a three-quarter view, his attention directed at something outside the frame, the particular set of his expression when he was thinking about art, considering, open, slightly younger looking than his usual composure. I had drawn it with the care I brought to everything in that sketchbook, which meant with more honesty than anything I had ever put on paper. He heard me come back, he looked up. We looked at each other. He closed the sketchbook carefully, set it on the desk. The motion was very deliberate, the motion of someone who is managing themselves with considerable effort. He did not say anything. I did not say anything. The silence lasted approximately 15 seconds, which was enough time for my entire understanding of the next hour, the next day, the next year to rearrange itself catastrophically. I should go, he said. His voice was completely level, the level of someone using all available resources to keep it that way. Will, I'll talk to you later, he said, not unkindly, not with distance exactly, but with the quality of a person who needs to leave before something happens that they're not ready for. He picked up his bag, he walked to the door, he let himself out. The door closed. I stood in my kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee and my sketchbook on my desk, and the knowledge that my best friend had just seen the most private truth of my life, and I put both mugs down very carefully on the counter, and then I sat on the kitchen floor, and I stayed there for a long time. I did not sleep Thursday night. I lay in the dark and ran the scenario forward in every direction I could think of, which is what the mind does when it is frightened and trying to regain control through exhaustive planning. I thought about what he had seen, and what it meant that he had seen it, and what his leaving meant, and what his silence meant, and what the words "I'll talk to you later" meant when later did not come. By 3 in the morning I had arrived at a temporary and unstable equilibrium. I did not know what was going to happen. I had no precedent for this. The thing I had kept most carefully from the world had been seen by the person whose seeing of it mattered most, and what he would do with what he'd seen was entirely outside my control, and the uncertainty of that was the specific, acute flavor of terror that I had spent 2 years trying to avoid. I texted him at 9 on Friday morning. Something ordinary, a question about a studio assignment we were both dealing with, the kind of text I would have sent on any other morning. I watched the delivered notification sit there, unresponding for 2 hours. Then, yeah, he'll figure it out. 3 words, lowercase, no punctuation. I stared at them for a long time. Not angry, he was not an angry person, and even when he was, he did not go cold. Not the dismissive brevity of someone who was done with me. Something else. The brevity of someone who was using all available bandwidth for something internal and had very little left for normal conversation. I called our mutual friend Danny at noon, not to tell her what had happened, but because I needed someone to talk to who wasn't Will and who wouldn't make me explain anything. Danny was a sculptor who had been in our circle since second year, dry and perceptive and the kind of friend who knew when to ask and when not to. We talked about studio things and the end of semester, and I said very little that was true, and she said, at a certain point, gently, "Are you okay?" "Yeah," I said, automatic. A pause. "Are you sure?" "I'm fine," I said, "just tired." She let it go. She would ask again later. I knew Danny always circled back, but for now she let it go and I was grateful. Friday evening I sat in my studio and drew. Not the private sketchbook, I couldn't look at it, couldn't touch it, It sat on my desk with the specific weight of something that has changed things. I drew on loose paper abstract things, shapes that I didn't direct, letting the pencil go where it needed to. What appeared when I looked at the pages later was a series of doors, closed doors, seen from the outside. The handle of each one slightly different. The light under each one slightly different. I understood what I was drawing. I drew it anyway. Will did not contact me again that day. Saturday was worse than Friday because on Saturday I had no obligations to structure the time. No studio classes, no assignments due, nothing to put my attention into that wasn't the relentless internal conversation I was having with myself about what was happening. I thought about every possibility with the thoroughness of someone who has been trained to think visually and is now applying that training to a scenario with multiple potential futures, all of them rendered in painful detail. The one I returned to most often, the one that sat in my chest with the most weight, was this. What if the silence was not about processing, but about ending? What if what he had seen had changed something fundamental in how he understood me, understood us, and the silence was the pause before the gentle, careful withdrawal of a person who no longer knew how to be what he had been? This was the fear I had been carrying for 2 years, not of being seen in the abstract. I had made peace mostly with what I was, in the private way of someone who has not yet taken the step into full openness, but who has stopped fighting the knowing. The specific fear was this, that the people who mattered most would see it and be different, that the friendship I valued above every other thing would crack along the seam of this truth, and the crack would spread. Well, had been my closest friend for 3 years. 3 years of the most honest friendship I had known. Of the late-night conversations that went nowhere and everywhere, of the arguments about art and design and what beauty was for, of the walks through the city where we talked about our families and our futures and the things we were afraid of the specific, accumulated trust of two people who had shown up for each other consistently enough that the showing up had become the ground under both of them. I did not know who I was without that ground. I tried to draw on Saturday and couldn't. I tried to read and couldn't. I made food I didn't eat and watched something on my laptop that I couldn't follow and lay on my bed at 11 at night with the lights on, staring at the ceiling, doing nothing useful. At midnight, I texted him one thing. Whatever you're thinking, I understand. Take the time you need. He read it, the read receipt appeared. He did not respond. I turned off the light. Sunday was the day I understood something important. I understood it slowly, the way you understand things that require dismantling a long-held structure to see what was underneath it. I understood it while I was making coffee in the morning and looking out the window at the October Sunday, gray sky, the trees doing their final surrender of leaves, the street below quiet in the specific way of Sunday mornings. The thing I understood was this. I had been for 2 years carrying the weight of a secret partly out of genuine uncertainty and partly out of fear, and the fear had always been, at its center, about exactly this, about being seen by the people who mattered, about what happened after the seeing. And now the thing I feared most had happened. And I was still here. Still in my apartment, still breathing, still drinking coffee, still capable of looking out a window at an October morning and finding it beautiful. The catastrophe had occurred and the world had not ended, and I was sitting in the ruins of my carefully constructed privacy and discovering that the ruins were survivable. Not comfortable, not resolved, not anything I would have chosen, but survivable. I thought about the sketchbook, about what it actually contained, about the fact that what Will had seen was not something shameful, it was my love, rendered in the only language I had ever fully trusted. It was the truth of who I was, expressed with the most care I knew how to bring to anything. There was nothing wrong with it. There had never been anything wrong with it. The wrong had always been in the hiding, not the thing being hidden. I took the sketchbook out of the desk drawer where I had put it after Thursday. I opened it. I looked at every page. And I thought, this is me. This is honestly entirely me. And if that costs me the friendship, then the friendship was never quite what I believed it was. And if it doesn't cost me the friendship, then I have been carrying this fear for 2 years for nothing. I did not know on Sunday morning which of those outcomes was coming. But I understood for the first time with my full self that either way I was going to be okay. Not immediately, not without cost, not without grief, but okay. I was still sitting with this, still in the gentle aftermath of an understanding that had rearranged something fundamental, when the knock came. 3 knocks. Not urgent, measured, deliberate. The knock of someone who has arrived after considerable thought and has decided to see it through. I knew it was him before I opened the door. Not because I had been expecting it, I had, genuinely, stopped expecting anything specific, but because the knock sounded like him. 3 years of knowing someone gives you their sounds. I opened the door. Will was standing in the hallway with his hands in his jacket pockets and the expression of someone who has been having a very difficult internal conversation for 3 days and has reached the end of it. He looked not unwell, but tired in the specific way of insufficient sleep and sustained emotional effort. His hair was slightly less managed than usual. His eyes had the quality of someone who has seen something they cannot unsee and has been deciding, for 72 hours, what to do about the seeing. He looked at me. "Can I come in?" he said. "Yes," I said. He came in. I closed the door. We stood in my living room, the canvases, the brushes, the late afternoon light that came through the west window on October evenings and made everything look briefly like a painting, and neither of us spoke for a moment. "I owe you an apology," he said. I blinked. That was not the opening I had prepared for. "You don't." "I do," he said. "I picked up your sketchbook without asking. That was a violation, even if it wasn't intentional. The sketchbook was on your desk and I picked it up without thinking, the way I pick up your things all the time, and I should have put it down the moment I understood what I was looking at. And instead I kept looking, and then I left without saying anything, and then I left you in silence for 3 days." He held my gaze. "That wasn't okay. Whatever else is true, that part wasn't okay." I looked at him. "It was an accident," I said. "The picking it up was," he said. "The leaving wasn't. I left because I needed to think, which I understand, but I should have said something before I went. I should have I should have told you I wasn't going anywhere, that I just needed time." He exhaled. "Instead, I left you 3 days of silence, and I know what that must have felt like. I'm sorry." I sat down on the edge of the couch. My legs needed somewhere to be. "Will," I said, "why did you need 3 days?" He sat down on the chair across from me, the good chair, the comfortable one he always chose. "Because," he said slowly, "what I saw in that sketchbook required me to be honest with myself about some things. And being honest with myself about those things required me to look at them from a lot of different angles before I was ready to talk about them out loud." I held his gaze. "What things?" He was quiet for a moment. "The portraits," he said, "the ones of me." He paused. "How long?" The question landed with its full weight. "The portrait specifically," I said, "about 6 months. And the sketchbook generally." 2 years. He absorbed this. "And before the sketchbook," he said. I looked at him. He was asking with the precision of someone who wants the honest answer, not a managed version. He deserved that. He had come back and he was sitting in my apartment and asking the real question, and he deserved the real answer. "Since about 8 months into knowing you," I said, "give or take." The room was very still. 2.5 years, he said softly, not an accusation, more like someone calculating the dimensions of something. "Yes," I said. "You didn't say anything." "No." "Why not?" I looked at my hands, then back at him. "Because you were the most important friendship in my life and I wasn't willing to risk it, because I didn't know how you'd respond, because I had spent a long time not fully knowing how to say this about myself to anyone, let alone to you specifically. I paused. And because, honestly, I thought that if I said it, I would lose you, and losing you was a worse outcome than carrying it. He was quiet for a long moment. "You thought I'd leave," he said. "I thought you might not know what to do with it," I said. "I thought it might change things in a way neither of us could undo. I stopped. I thought the friendship as it was, with the secret intact, was better than the risk of losing it entirely." "And now," he said. "Now it's out anyway," I said. "And I'm sitting here and you came back and I don't know what that means yet, but—" my voice caught slightly. "But I'm glad you came back. Whatever you need to say, I'm glad you're here to say it." Will looked at me for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and pressed his hands together, and looked at the floor with the expression of someone about to do something that requires courage. The specific, gathered look of a person taking a breath before a difficult thing. "I need to tell you what I was doing for 3 days," he said. "Thursday night," he said, "I went home and I sat in my apartment and I felt a lot of things. Some of them were about you. Most of them were about me. I waited. I want to be honest about my first reaction," he said. "My first reaction, the immediate reaction, the one I had before I had time to think, was not what I would have predicted. I'd have predicted surprise. What I actually felt was," he stopped, tried again. "It was more like recognition, like something I'd been looking at for a long time without naming had been named for me." He looked up at me. "I've been looking at the drawing you did of me," he said. "The one in the gallery 3 weeks ago, the afternoon we spent there. I knew the afternoon you were drawing from. I could tell by the angle, the light. And what I saw in that drawing was," he paused, finding the words. "It was the way you see me, the specific attention of how you see me. And I realized standing at your desk that I knew that attention. I had felt it. Not as something overwhelming, not as something I'd categorized, but as a quality of being around you that I had always felt and never examined." He stood up, not from agitation, from the need to move while he was thinking, which I recognized as characteristic, the way he processed things. "I spent Thursday night going back through 3 years of moments, conversations, the specific way things felt between us at certain times, trying to understand whether what I thought I was remembering was actually there, or whether I was revising the past to fit a new understanding." He moved to the window, stood with his back partially to me, looking out at the October evening. "And what I kept finding was that it was actually there. That there was something in how I had always been around you that I had never named, but that had a name. And the reason I hadn't named it was—" He turned to look at me. "I didn't know I was allowed to," he said. I stared at him. "Will," I said. "I've spent most of my adult life," he said, and his voice was very careful now, the way his voice got when he was saying something true that he had tested from every angle before speaking, not examining certain things. Not because I was afraid of them exactly, but because I didn't have the context for them. I didn't know what to do with them, so I put them somewhere and I kept them there and I moved on. He came back to the chair, sat down, looked at me directly. "When I saw your sketchbook," he said, "I saw someone who had found a way to be honest with themselves on paper, in private, but honest. And then I went home and I thought, when was the last time I was that honest with myself? 3 days is a long time to think about that," I said carefully. "I needed 3 days," he said, "because what I found when I actually looked was more than I expected. And I needed to be sure I understood it before I came back here, because I wasn't going to come back and say something to you that I hadn't actually understood myself." The late afternoon light had shifted toward evening. The October sky outside the window was the deep blue of early dusk. "What did you understand?" I said. He held my gaze. "That the thing in your sketchbook, what I saw in those drawings, the quality of the attention in them, I think I know what that's like," he said. "I think I have known what that's like with you for a long time. He stopped. I kept calling it friendship, because that was the available word, because I didn't have another language for it. And I think part of me didn't look for another language because it felt like stepping off a ledge into something I couldn't see the bottom of. I was barely breathing. "Are you saying," I said very carefully, "what I think you're saying?" He met my eyes. "I think so," he said. "I'm newer to this than you are. I'm still learning what the words are, what it means for me, who I am in relation to it. But I know what I felt when I saw that drawing, and I know what I've felt looking back over 3 years with honest eyes." He paused. "And I know that the reason I came back tonight instead of staying away because it was easier is that the person I most needed to talk to about all of this is you, because it's always been you. Every time something happens that matters, you're the first person I want to tell." The room held its breath. "Will," I said, my voice was unsteady. I know this is a lot," he said. "I know I've been silent for 3 days and now I'm saying all of this at once, and I don't expect you to." "Will," I said again, "stop." He stopped. "You just told me," I said, "that you went home on Thursday and you spent 3 days being honest with yourself, and what you found was you came back. You came back to tell me." "Yes," he said. "Do you know," I said slowly, "how many times I imagined this conversation? Not because I thought it would happen, I had genuinely stopped thinking it would happen, but in the private version, the one in the sketchbook I had imagined, I stopped. I didn't think you'd come back." "I know," he said. "I know the silence was." "Not the silence," I said. "I mean I didn't think there was a version of this where you came back and said what you just said. I thought there were two versions. You come back and it's fine and we never speak of it, or you come back and things are different in a way we'd have to manage. I didn't have a version where you came back." And I looked at him. This. He was looking at me with the expression I had drawn from memory 3 weeks ago in the gallery, present, open, thinking, but fuller than the drawing, more than what any drawing could fully contain, because a drawing is what the eye sees and this was also everything else. "I'm sorry it took your sketchbook to get me here," he said quietly. "I should have been braver sooner." "I should have been braver sooner," I said. "We can argue about who owes who what later." The corner of his mouth moved. "Is that a joke?" he said. "It's a small one," I said. He laughed, the real one, quick and genuine and arrived at without warning, the one I had been drawing from memory for 6 months because I could never quite capture it in the moment. And something in me that had been held very carefully for a very long time simply let go. We talked for 4 hours that Sunday evening. Not about everything, there was too much, and not all of it was ready to be said yet. We talked about the sketchbook, about the specific pages, about what I had been feeling when I drew each one. I brought it over and we looked at it together, which was the most exposed I had ever felt in my life, and also, underneath that exposure, something I did not have a precise word for, the strange, enormous relief of being seen completely and still looked at with warmth. He turned the pages with the careful attention of a designer, someone who understood what lines and marks meant, who read visual language fluently. He was quiet through most of it. Occasionally he made a small sound, not quite a word, but the sound of understanding arriving. When he reached the last pages, the most recent ones, the most direct, he was quiet for a long time. "This is how you see me," he said finally. "Yes," I said. "This is honest." "It's the most honest thing I've ever made," I said. He looked at the page for another moment. Then he closed the sketchbook gently and set it on the table between us and looked at me. "I want to tell you something," he said, "about Friday and Saturday." "Okay," I said. "I called my brother on Friday," he said. "My older brother, Mateo. We're close. He's the person I call when something serious is happening." He paused. "I told him what I'd found in your sketchbook, and then I told him the rest of it, what I'd been finding when I looked honestly at things. I told him I thought I might be, that I was beginning to understand something about myself that I hadn't understood before." I watched him. "What did Mateo say?" I asked. The corner of his mouth moved again, something between a laugh and the shadow of one. He said, "It took you long enough." I blinked. "He said he'd known since I was about 19, Will said. "He said he'd been waiting for me to figure it out. He said, and this is the part that got me, he said he'd been watching me with you for 2 years, and it was the least subtle thing he'd ever seen." "Mateo," I said, "sounds like a very perceptive person." "He's insufferable," Will said with affection. "He said to tell you he approves incidentally. He's never met you. He approves of me sight unseen. Based on the drawings, apparently." He paused. "I showed him one on my phone. I hope that's okay." "Which one?" "The one from the gallery," he said. I looked at the sketchbook on the table between us. "I think," I said, "that's all right." We stayed in the apartment until midnight, talking through the things we hadn't been able to say over 3 years, not all of them, not with the completeness that would come later, but the first pass through them. The things I had carried, the things he had not examined, the specific texture of what we had been to each other, and what it might become now that honesty had been introduced into the equation. We did not resolve everything. There was too much still being understood by both of us in different ways. I had carried my truth for years and had the worn familiarity of long acquaintance with it. He had found his 3 days ago and was still in the early, disorienting stage of rearranging a self-understanding. What we resolved was this: we were not going to go back to the managed version, the version where the truth was kept in a drawer in a sketchbook. We were going to move forward honestly, carefully, at a pace that made room for both of us to find our footing, but honestly. "I need some time," he said near the end of the evening. "Not from you, not like Thursday. I don't mean silence. I mean I need to understand myself better before I can fully understand us. Does that make sense?" "Yes," I said. "Take the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." He looked at me with the expression that I had tried and failed to fully capture in any drawing: present, genuine, the full attention of a person who is seeing you clearly and choosing to stay. "Neither am I," he said. "Will came out to his family at Christmas. Not dramatically. He told me he had planned something elaborate and then arrived at his parents' house and found the elaborate plan entirely unnecessary, because Mateo had apparently been quietly laying groundwork for years in the way of older siblings who see things first and manage the reception before the arrival. His parents had been not without questions, not without the minor friction of adjusting to new understanding, but fundamentally, lovingly present. His mother had asked at dinner whether there was anyone he was seeing. He had said, and this is the part he told me with the particular combination of shyness and humor that was entirely characteristic, that there was someone he cared about very much and was in the process of figuring out with. His father had said, "What does he do?" Will had laughed until his eyes watered. He told me. I came out in January to my parents, to my studio professors, to the friends who had not known. The conversations were various and imperfect and real, as these conversations always are. My mother had cried briefly and happily and then said, "I always knew your art was trying to tell me something." My father had shaken my hand, formally and then less formally, and said, "I'm proud of you." 3 words that I had not known I needed until they arrived. Danny, who had noticed in October that something was wrong, and had been waiting with characteristic patience for the full story, received the full story with the equanimity of someone who is rarely surprised by people and who had suspected, she admitted, since approximately the middle of second year. "The way you draw, Will," she said, "has always been different from the way you draw everyone else." "That obvious?" I said. "To someone who's been looking," she said. "Yes, to someone who wasn't looking, probably not." Will and I moved slowly and with intention. This was the right pace for both of us, him finding his footing in a new self-understanding, me learning to be known rather than hidden, both of us building something on the foundation of 3 years of genuine friendship, and being careful not to rush it into a shape before it was ready to hold the shape. What we built was real. I know that word real does not do the work of fully describing it, but it is the right word. It is real in the way that things built from honesty are real, structural, load-bearing, capable of holding weight. Not perfect, we were two people who were both, in different ways, newly arrived at ourselves, and that produced the ordinary frictions and uncertainties of any two people figuring out how to be together. But underneath the frictions was the ground of 3 years of genuine knowing, and that ground held. In March, I started a new sketchbook. Not a replacement for the private one. That one lived in my desk drawer still, had always been there, was the record of a specific chapter and was meant to stay that way. The new one was different in kind. Not hidden, not kept in a drawer. Left on the desk where anyone could pick it up, including the person who had accidentally picked up the last one and changed both our lives. I drew differently in the new one. Not more skillfully, skill is its own progression, unrelated to this. Differently in the way of someone who is drawing without the weight of secrecy. Differently in the way of someone who is making honest work in a context where honesty is allowed, which it turns out produces a different kind of line, freer, more direct, less effortful. The effort of concealment had been so long a part of the making that I had not known how much of my energy it was using until it was no longer needed. I drew Will in the new sketchbook too. He saw them. He saw all of them now. He asked too, with the genuine curiosity of a designer who wanted to understand how I saw things and what seeing things with love looked like, rendered in lines. He looked at each one with the full attention he brought to things that mattered, and occasionally said something about the composition or the line quality, and occasionally said nothing. And sometimes he looked at one and then at me with the specific expression I had been learning over the months, warm and direct and unhurried, that I was still, if I was honest, finding a little difficult to look at directly without the old instinct to look away. I was working on the looking directly. One evening he was watching me draw, sitting across the studio table, his own design work beside him, the comfortable parallel working that had been the texture of our friendship since the beginning, and was now the texture of something more than friendship. And he said, "I've been thinking about something." "What?" I said, not looking up from the page. "The sketchbook," he said, "the original one, the private one." I looked up. "What about it?" "I've been thinking about the fact that you made something that honest for 2 years in private with no expectation that anyone would ever see it." He paused. "And how much, what it took, to keep making it. To keep being that honest in the dark when there was no reason to expect it would ever matter to anyone." I looked at him. "It mattered to me," I said. "That's why I kept making it." "I know," he said. "That's the part I've been thinking about." He held my gaze. "You were honest about yourself alone in a drawer for 2 years, before anyone was watching, before it could get you anything, just because it was true." He paused. "I want to be that kind of honest." I looked at him across the studio table in the evening light. "You came back," I said. "After 3 days you came back. You could have stayed away, it would have been easier. You came back and you said the true thing." I held his gaze. "That's already that kind of honest." He was quiet for a moment. "Then keep drawing," he said, the quiet warmth in his voice that I was still, months in, receiving like something I hadn't expected to be given. I looked back at the page. I kept drawing. He saw my secret. He went away. For 3 days the silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. And then he came back. Not because he had to, not because it was easy, because the truth was worth coming back for. Yours will be too.